And what occurs to me about that is it probably was a similar sort of gift that you have, that you were both born with a similar sort of brain wiring that allowed you to see it all in kind of a picture.
It's a tough one to draw that correlation, even at a personal level. Like any sort of comparison with me and Mozart is like, yeah. Um, I see, elements of it where, where it does make sense. Because look, I have, I've had the privilege of training thousands of music educators, and here's me, a high school dropout, didn't, finish 10th grade. That was it for me. And I'm training people with doctorates in performance and theory, and scores of music directors and people with degrees in performance and pedagogy and theory. And I'm not any of that, but I am what I am, and what I have, I believe, is relevant to the world at large. And when I look at and share these concepts, it's really interesting, particularly in the highly trained and formally educated musicians. They say, you know what, I've sort of always done something like this now and haven't even realized, but now that I see what you're doing, I've often thought of music this way. So it's not even that it's that unique. I think it happens for a lot of us in a lot of ways. Sort of like we learn the alphabet and then we learn to bring the alphabet together and it creates words. But when we're reading, we're not really reading the letters of the word. We see it as a whole, but we're not even reading the individual words. We actually are reading almost the silhouette, the shape of the word itself, and the shape of the phrase that we're reading at any point of time. And this is sort of more like that. So that I think my role isn't so much that I created it. And I get lots of people saying, wow, you're a genius. And it's like, really, I'm not. If I've played a role, this way of looking at music was with me before I was even aware of my own existence. Let's get clear that I'm not the creator of this. This was from a higher source. I just got to be the middle guy. Now, if I played a role, my role is that I've spent tens of thousands of hours codifying it into a system, structured, scaffolded curriculum, creating terms of art, languaging distinctions, creating frameworks. I have a deep interest in the structure of human behavior. That's come into play in the way that we do it. I've got a strong relationship to composition. So the curriculum is built around, a really large collection of my own compositions, all that stuff, which has been wonderful. But I didn't create this, and that this way of looking at music is very natural for everybody. We just have to shine a light on it and allow people to be able to have that switch in perspective that seems to be really natural and organic. And we get to do that with students across all ages, children, teens, adults. 95% of music education, I believe, is between 5 and 12 years of age. But in our world, this method accesses the brain so differently that half of our students are between 35 and 100 years of age, total beginners. And it's really super important because of where we're at now in human history. And that's I think that's perhaps the most important point right now. If I can just say a bit about that.
Yeah, please.
I'm an optimist about the future, like down to the genetics of my DNA. I'm an optimist. But we're on the cusp of such a unique time, and we're only scratching the surface of seeing what we will witness over the coming decade is the arrival of an entirely new level of advanced technologies that I believe will completely redefine life on Earth, and it will redefine what it means to be human. When we really see the impact of artificial intelligence, sophisticated virtual and augmented realities, fully self-guiding transportation, major breakthroughs in lifespan extension, connecting our brains to the cloud, microtechnology, nanorobotics in our bodies. I mean, witnessing the birth of humanity becoming a multi-planetary species, astounding technology will be everywhere, redefining life on Earth, and it will require us to rethink who and what we are. And as much as there's so much about that that's unpredictable, one thing that we know is that we need to think more creatively than ever before, just as a means of figuring out how we're going to address the complexities of the technological world that we're heading into. And so for us, I believe that humanity needs to become the most creative version of our species ever. And what we're understanding about musicianship, there's an infancy in a new area of understanding about musicianship, learning to play. We're now that prior notion that we had that the analytical person was a left brain person and the creative was a right brain person, we know now that that's not true. That the creativity has far more to do with how connected both sides of the brain are, and as well as how impacted both the short range and the long range connections are between different areas of the brain. And what we're learning is that we've got this massive bundle of millions of nerve fibers, the corpus callosum that connects both sides of the brain, as I call the creative control center, millions of nerve fibers. What we're learning about musicianship, learning to play, is that it literally grows the brain. It increases neural connectivity. Brain scans show that people who learn music, that corpus callosum is larger. There's more connectivity. So as much as we love music and all the benefit, the emotional benefits, the social benefits, the physical benefits, the psychological benefits, that beautiful form of self-expression that it is, all of which is wonderful. But what we now have the opportunity to do is to understand more powerfully and with more relevance that musicianship provides the brain with this critical neurological nutrition that grows the brain, increases neural connectivity, helps develop our creative capability, and helps to future prepare us.
Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer. It's so amazing and exciting to have Neil Moore join us today. Neil is a music director, author, and speaker. He was born in 1957 in Melbourne, Australia, and migrated to the United States in 1994. He's the founder of Simply Music, an international organization that is the world leader in playing-based music education. His breakthrough methodology transforms 300 years of formal music education and is focused on bringing music to the masses. His Simply Music program is taught by a global community of educators and provides instruction to a community of students spanning 135 countries. Neil's massive transformational purpose is to cause a global breakthrough in music education, transform access to musical self-expression, and elevate the creative capability of humanity. He also has a personal goal for Simply Music to be chosen as the music education platform introduced as part of the colonization of Mars. Neil, it's so great to have you on the show.
It's great to be here, Stephan. Thanks so much. Good to see you.
Good to see you. And we know each other through Genius Network, which is Joe Polish's mastermind community that I've been a part of for a number of years. I know you've been in there even longer than me. I've been in since 2018, so about
2010, end of 2010, 2011,
wow. So you've been paying $25,000 a year since 2010. That's a commitment.
For that community, yeah, I've sort of invested a lot. I'm in a number of entrepreneurial communities, and I just really consider it to be one of the critical investments in my life to participate in those communities.
Yeah, me too. I wholeheartedly agree. So what are some of the other brotherhood communities, masterminds that you're also in?
Well, spent years with Dan Sullivan in Strategic Coach, Peter Diamandis' Abundance 360 community, which is remarkable. Giovanni Masico's Archangel Academy, and Steve Sims' Speakeasy community. They're the main communities that I'm most consistently, actively engaged with.
Right. So how is Steve Sims' community? I actually had him on this podcast, or maybe it was the other show on Marketing Speak. I had him on. Yeah, I think it was the other show. He's amazing.
He is amazing.
What is his value proposition for his mastermind?
Well, I think any of the masterminds are really designed to connect people with others, like-minded people, support one another in what it is that you're taking on. Particularly, the bigger the project, I find the higher level of support that's available, which is just wonderful. Being around Steve is amazing. He's just a really unique character, and that he's very, very, there's that gruff, tough appearance of Steve, and that hardworking, working class background that he's had. But the guy's really understated, and he's kind and gentle and very smart, and he knows a great many people. And I just love being in communities where I'm by far not even close to being the smartest person in the room. I just find it really inspiring to be around people who are really dedicated and fully immersed in doing what they're up to doing. And Steve's community is awesome to be a part of that. But all the communities that I'm a part of are remarkable, and great people all over the place. Kind-hearted, huge social consciences, taking on big projects, recognizing fundamentally that, hey, if we're going to raise the standard of living for anybody, we need to elevate the standard of living for everybody. So how do we actually increase our impact and do so in a way that impacts people's experience of themselves and elevates their quality of life?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And Archangel Academy, what's unique or special about that program? I love the name, by the way. I'm a big fan of archangels.
The culture of any organization, primarily comes from the person at the top. So in that instance, it would be Giovanni Marsico. He's a dear friend who I met also through Joe Polish. In fact, every major relationship that I've had over the last 12 years has come about directly or indirectly because of Joe. He's just been an amazing connector. Giovanni has a couple of tiers to his organization. Primarily the synergy community, younger entrepreneurs that are perhaps earlier on in their journey. It's a 50-50 balance between men and women, which is a little unusual because the vast majority of communities that I've been a part of have primarily been predominantly men. And so in the environment where there's 50-50 women, that's a pretty great balance. I've got an organization, I've got like 700 educators in my organization, and 95% of them are women. So I'm, very much a supporter of the empowering women, and I love the energy of being around women. So Giovanni's primary commitments are: one, how do we empower and impact young people or relatively new entrepreneurs that are on the pathway of commitment to becoming millionaires. And his definition of millionaires is people that have whose message or service or contribution is impacting or committed to impacting the lives of at least 1 million people. So that's his definition of a millionaire. The Archangel Council Group is people who are further along in their journey, and for the most part are a little further down the track in the size of their organizations. But once again, it's how do we create a support network? How do we get around people where you're able to share the commonality of the issues and challenges and problems? What have people found to be the best practices in addressing their problems? I think that's a similarity between all of the mastermind communities. I just like being around people that are doing great things.
Yeah, amazing. Now, you mentioned that 95% of your teachers and the staff in your organization are women. So why is that? I'm curious. Was that by design, or did that just kind of happen organically?
Uh, Probably the truthful answer is both, although the first thing by design seems less apparent. My father was self-employed from a really young age, an early teenage. My dad was about 13 when his father died, and so my dad left school and took on the responsibility of being the primary income earner for the family. And so he, stepped into that level of responsibility from a really young age. But one of the many things I learned from him, my parents, but in particular my dad, he had just a great respect for women. And most of the women who worked in his businesses were certainly, the people with the most authority, the people that were most highly paid in his organization were women. And we had a family business that was also conducted out of our home, and we would often have the people from my family's business in our home, and just watching my dad over his lifetime, the courtesy and the kindness and the respect that he demonstrated for women had a big impact on me. And so, I've been self-employed since I was in my early 20s. So I'm 65 now, so, 42 years or so. And in every business I've had, the majority of the people that I've employed have been women. For the most part, that's been by design, by choice. But over the last 25 years, in the journey of Simply Music and coming over here and launching it from the United States, the vast majority of music educators are women. And so there's that aspect of it being by default, but then there's also that aspect of it where it's like, that's been my functional process as an employer. So I'd have to say that both come into play. And certainly in my company, the people with the most authority and most highly paid are women.
Gotcha. Yeah. Speaking of women as music educators, my youngest daughter, who is 26 now, she's an entrepreneur and a music educator. She has her own piano teaching business in Orange County, California, and she's phenomenal. Like at her craft, at what she does, she's so passionate about it, and she's going to university studying music, and she plays Rachmaninoff and Chopin and Scarlatti, and yeah, it was just it's really impressive. Yeah, high level stuff, and yet she's very accessible to her students. She doesn't put on any airs. She makes it really fun and playful and engaging. She brings little toys, presents, and things for the kids to reward them for doing a good job and doing their homework and things like that. She's really great educator too, and that's not a given that somebody is a great educator and therefore they're a great musician or vice versa.
Oh, absolutely not. That's right. Exactly. Yeah. In some respects, the two have little to do with each other.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about your origin story. If you could kind of share some of the big highlights that got to you to where you're at now. Of course, your dad being a huge part of that in the early years, but yeah, what would be some of the milestones or highlights that our listener or viewer would want to know?
Well, I'm the youngest of five, and there's only 7 years between the five of us. So, from that point of view, it was like baby, baby, baby. 5 kids in 7 years my parents had. I have an older sister and three older brothers, and for each of the boys, when we turned seven, we began piano lessons. My parents say that my relationship to music was completely different than that of my older brothers, and it was very evident from infancy. I mean, that part of it I can't remember, but they would say, it wouldn't matter if there was music playing anywhere in the house. That's where I would roll, and I would just lie there listening to the music for as long as it was being played. I was probably about. It keeps getting younger, actually, the more that I think about it over my lifetime. But I was about three three around 3 or 4 where I have my earliest recollection of, I hear music and I see 2 and 3 dimensional shapes. And I didn't think anything of that. That's just the way that it occurs for me. And when I began studying piano at the age of 7, it was my turn to begin lessons. My teacher would play the songs I was going to be learning, and I could see those shapes, unfolding across the geography of the keyboard. That's how I developed my entire musicianship. I didn't learn how to read. I found it unnecessary, utterly unnecessary, and I found it intimidating just looking at the page. I had no need for it. But I always thought that I was doing something wrong, that I should be learning the right way, which was learning how to read music like, my older siblings were, but that just wasn't my world. So I had a certain amount of trauma associated with that. Every Saturday, our teacher would come over to our home, and one brother would have the lesson at 9 o'clock, then 9:30, the next one, and 10 o'clock. And as it got closer and closer to mine, there'd be this, fear that I had that this would be the lesson when I was going to be found out that I was cheating and not doing the right thing, which is learning how to read. So I'd sit at my lesson, blindly sort of staring at the page, pretending I'm reading, but unfolding everything from shapes and patterns. And what I didn't know is my teacher would go to my mother and say, Neil's not reading. He's just pretending. He's staring at the page. He's not reading at all. He thinks he's fooling me, but he's not. But fortunately, my mother said, yeah, but listen to him play. Just let him be. Let him do his own thing. I didn't know they'd made that deal. And so I went along believing that I was doing something wrong and at any moment I was going to get found out. And Stephan, really, it had a huge impact on me. Even, going through school and into, high school or secondary school, as we called it in Australia, I didn't want to go over to a friend's house if they had a piano because I was scared that, if the parents said, oh, you're learning piano, and they pull out some music and ask me to play something, I'd be found out as being the fraud. So it was always a very, very personal, private thing for me that this was just the way that I learned. And so coming from a self-employed family, I was a dedicated, terrible student. I hated school. I really hated school. I loved learning, and I read a lot from a very young age, always read ahead of my years. I consider myself largely self-taught, but I hated school, and I couldn't wait to get out of school. I just wanted to get into the workforce. And coming from a family of self-employed, none of us went to university or college. I actually got into the restaurant industry. I had 3 restaurants over from the early 80s until the early 90s. And the goal was get into business, do well enough and earn enough so that I can retire young and do music. I didn't even know what do music would mean. The Australia is a wonderful country, and it's the same physical size as the United States, but it's a very small population. The US has an economic infrastructure that's designed to support hundreds of millions of people. Australia's only got 25 million. So one of the ways in which that's significantly different than, say, the US is that it's such a smaller economy by comparison. And as a result of that, there are fewer opportunities. So the likelihood of being able to have a really successful profession in music is pretty remote. So my thoughts were do well enough in business and, get out of that young and be able to just do music, whatever that was. But I was successful as a restaurateur, but I wasn't successful in keeping money. And I made a couple of really dumb decisions and went through a complete wipeout, financial wipeout. And that was a really fantastic experience for me. There were 2 things that I learned in going through that complete wipeout. One was there was this one particular day where, I won't go into the circumstances, but something had happened where we were just wrapping up our lives and everything was being taken. And I had this experience of, wow, I'm losing everything that I have, but I'm losing nothing of who I am. And at the time, that was a really important distinction for me. I felt completely at peace, whole and complete. And then the second thing was that I suddenly saw my life and pictured it as an equation. It's like, oh, okay, I've been invested in business to earn money to one day do what I love. And it just occurred for me as a broken conversation. I thought, I believe that I always believe that I belong to music and that I'm meant to do it. If there is such a thing as divine design, and I don't really care whether that's true or not, I just get value in believing that it's true. If there is such a thing as divine design, I'm going to commit myself to music and trust that a pathway will reveal itself. And, here I am in my 30s, I'm married, I've got 3 children, and I'm broke and no income. And here's me saying, I'm going to pursue music. And I thought at that time, well, if I'm going to do music, I don't even know any of the language. I had no real formal knowledge. I couldn't read music. I had no theoretical understanding. I was just a sort of self-taught player that had this unique way of looking at things. I thought I'd better return to some studies. So I started doing classes in music and began expanding my theoretical knowledge. There was a man in Australia who was teaching a traditional program, but a different approach to reading, and I needed to learn how to read. I did his program. He wanted to expand his organization of teachers. And with my background in small business and my relationship to music, and now with this newfound approach to learning to read, I thought I could teach this, and I bet I could do this successfully, which I did. And there were a series of reasons behind this, but we just decided, both my wife and I felt that we just wanted to come to the United States. For both of us, we felt that there was an epicenter here for me, for music. And my wife had been an exchange student in the United States for her senior year of high school, and she wanted the opportunity to live here. So we decided to come to the United States. We were flat broke, came over here with my wife, our 3 children, our life possessions in 3 suitcases, and $5,000. That was it. And an idea and a belief that I had something to contribute. I started teaching, and I very quickly built a studio, very quickly got a reputation as a successful teacher. And I get this phone call one day from this agency, like a government agency, and they said, we're working with this boy, 8-year-old boy who's blind. We think we can restore his sight, but he's going into hospital regularly to have procedures done. It's really tough on this kid. We'd love him to have some activity. Do you think you could teach him music? And I said, yes, absolutely. I just jumped at the opportunity. And it wasn't until I jumped at the opportunity and afterwards that I thought, heck, the only thing I've been taught to teach is this traditional reading-based approach. And here's a kid who's blind. He's not going to be able to read. What the heck am I going to do? And Stephan, it wasn't until that moment that it actually occurred to me consciously for the first time, hang on, I never learned to read. What was I actually doing? I'd never thought of it before. It had happened and it was sort of invisible. It was so organic to me, but I'd never actually consciously thought of it. So it's like, I sat down and just sat at the piano and I started, just constructing something. And it's like, oh, I can see what I'm doing. And I started to create distinctions and describe things and create terms of art. And I thought, I bet I can show this kid how to feel his way through learning how to play based on the feel of these shapes and patterns. So that's what I did. he was doing incredibly well. He'd only been learning a few months. He had a whole repertoire of stuff that he was playing. And I said to his dad one day, the boy's name was Wade, I said, hey, are you happy with Wade's progress? And his dad said, we're not only happy with it, but he's teaching his 4-year-old sister how to play, and she's blind too.
Wow.
And that was just like, even when I tell the story, I just, it has a physical impact on me. I didn't know what had happened. I just knew something had happened. And I thought, wow, if I could teach this 8-year-old boy who's blind how to play in this approach, shapes and patterns, and he can turn around and teach his 4-year-old sister how to play, and she's blind too, what would happen if I introduced this to typical learners? Thinking then that it might be just maybe this fun little music preschool before we got to real music, which was, the traditional approach of learning how to read. So as I started to share that with my students, I just saw a completely different experience in the quantity of music that they were learning, the quality of that music, how quickly they were learning, how easily they were learning. And I thought, well, this has just got to be because it's so organic to me. But fortunately, I had access to other educators, and I thought, I wonder what would happen if I shared this with other educators. And so I began sharing the concepts, and they came back saying, we haven't seen anything like this. It's a completely different experience for the students. It's a completely different experience to teach it. And the students are doing so well. I thought, wow, this, I think I might have something here. So I sort of went into a laboratory setting of, fortunately, I had a really large studio. I was teaching 125 students privately every week. I was doing about 65 hours of face-to-face teaching. And that became a fantastic R&D environment for me to really stress test this as a method, with the question coming from, how far can I take this? Will it apply to contemporary and classical and gospel and blues and jazz and composition and improvisation? And how far can we go before we really need to introduce the more formal theoretical aspects of music learning? And that really gave the basis to, the genesis of the whole thing. And here we are now with, look, when people look at us, it might look from the outside like we're a really large organization. I mean, we have a student community across 135 countries and, about 700 educators, that teach the method exclusively. But in the bigger scheme of things, we're only just scratching the tip of the iceberg, and we are at a really, really unique time right about now. So I know that's a super long answer to a simple question, but I'm not really good at giving short answers. My staff come in and say, hey, Neil, I've got a quick question. And it might be, well, look, I'm sure the question's quick, but the answer's probably going to take some time.
Yeah, I've got a quick question. Well, I've got a really long answer.
It's sort of like that. Oh, gosh. Too
Yeah, that's
verbose.
awesome, though. And it's so inspiring hearing you share that story. And wow, when you said the thing about divine design, and of course, I believe that too with all of my heart and soul. And I have been blessed with the connection to many of us have or have been awakened to, because we all have it. We all have this psychic ability, this connection to the creator and to the upper worlds and to, our unseen support team. Well, then when you shared the story about the 8-year-old blind boy, the words that just came through loud and clear was that was a divine setup for you. That had to happen, because that is what was the impetus for you to, that was your turning point. That was the door opening to you utilizing that special gift that you were given, that synesthesia that you discovered at age 3, that turned into a business and a movement and a world changing methodology. It's beautiful.
Thanks, Stephan. Thank you. Yeah, that aspect of it too. I mean, even this relationship that I had that was very evident in infancy, for me, I just believe that I was probably born with this pre-installed, and there's been a whole series of miracles along the way. I mean, look, it's been a really complicated process to build this organization. I mean, I've never built and run and managed an international organization. Frankly, I don't even think I should be running the organization. I'm not good at it. A lot of what it takes to be able to organize and manage comprehensively, successfully manage the minutia in an international organization isn't really my unique ability. So I've done an adequate job at best, and I think I've kept it alive. And we've got an incredible proof of concept now over decades, and having millions and millions of lessons now being taught. That's been amazing. But we're at this really unique time where we're on the cusp of a line of demarcation, a complete shift in what it is we're doing and where we're heading.
So is it time for you to hire a CEO? Or are you already in that process?
Yeah, we're in that process, and I don't know whether it's a CEO, but it's certainly the version of that. Whether it's a general manager, I need to bring on an operations person. Most of our systems that we have are really domestic, and so we don't really have immediate access to important decision-making defining data. And so we're doing a complete rebuild of our technology, and we need to now seriously look at the role of what the integration of AI will have on this. I need the right marketing partner. We need an operations person, the right financial person, and a general manager or a CEO. And so I need to step out from behind the curtain. Largely, we've grown up from word of mouth. So I have never, when I look at our educator community and the growth of it, I've never, ever constructed and articulated and rolled out and managed a marketing plan ever. It's just grown. I've let it just grow organically from word of mouth entirely. And so one of the big factors of this is people don't even know about the program, by and large, on a larger scale. But we're in such a unique time in human history. And it's a juxtaposition of several things that I think position us. We are perfectly poised right now to completely transform not only our direction, but our growth. Our growth, that linear growth is great. And it's been wonderful. And in many respects, there's not a better way to grow with confidence and authenticity and integrity than when someone calls you and says, I'm doing this thing and I love this thing, Stephan, and you should be doing this thing. When it's coming from someone who you know and know well and trust, that the power of that sort of word of mouth, as distinct from the anonymity of social media, when it's coming from your own inner circle, there's a certain credibility that comes hand in hand with that. And that's been the basis of how we've grown. A teacher has called their sister and she's called her best friend and told her about it. And her best friend's got another best friend who's a teacher. There's been this organic growth, which has been fine, but it's completely inadequate to develop the velocity, acceleration, to be able to accelerate up the knee of the exponential curve. And that's what we need right now because of the uniqueness of this exact point of time in human history, which I just think is the most thrilling point of time in the history of human history.
Amazing. So one thing that really made a difference in my business, and maybe this is the thing that you needed to hear today, I don't know, we'll see, is God became my business partner about, I think 18 months ago. I didn't take it for granted, and I didn't assume that he was going to say yes, but I did ask him, and he did say yes. I felt the yes, or I heard the yes in my head, and things have just been radically different for me ever since. I used to be on the road all the time, traveling to masterminds and conferences and trade shows. I'd travel on average maybe twice a month, and that was tolerable. It's actually fun when my wife went with me, but we have a 3-year-old son now, and I have no interest in business travel for the sake of it. I don't want to be on the road. I don't want to be a road warrior. And I haven't had to, not since God became my business partner. Just these leads show up out of nowhere. And I have not been at a conference giving a presentation for, I don't know, several years. I think I maybe did one in the last few years, but pre-COVID, I would be on the road all the time, and I could still do that if I wanted to, but I don't want to. And that's the thing, that if you don't want to, if you want to be behind the curtain, or you want to be in front of the curtain, or you want to change your role to be more of the visionary and then you bring on the integrator, or you want to be the integrator and you want to bring on the visionary, whatever it is, you can achieve it because God's your business partner and he's lining things up for you. The leads, the staff, the vendors, the strategic partnerships, it's all just coming. Now, it doesn't mean sit on the couch and do nothing. You still, like, we live in a world of action. But if you take appropriate action, know that you're being carried along the river. You're not having to swim it anymore.
Yeah, that's great, Stephan. It's like that. And where that aligns with my relationship with things is that, we live life forward and understand it backwards, And so, for me, I go through my day interacting with my day as though I'm making the decisions. I'm choosing to do this. We're going to go here. We're not going to do that, etc. It has that quality of, I'm the one who's shaping the direction. But at any point of time, if I stop and look back at the synergy between one step and the next, the randomness that has organized itself so beautifully, and apparently so meaningfully, it just doesn't make sense to me any other way than to see that, there's a divine hand in this.
Yeah. Even the stuff that you remember, even the little quotes or the stories from books that you've read or from movies that you've watched, the different kinds of movies and TV shows and everything that you have watched over the years, what you've retained, the different bits of knowledge from your studies, from school and everything. It's all divinely orchestrated. It's all through that divine design. And it doesn't click until you have that awakening moment and you can look backwards and connect the dots. Before that, it just seems like things just happen, but nothing just happens. There is absolutely zero randomness. The randomness is not random. And once you come to that realization, or that's been revealed to you, wow, this this whole game that we're playing called life takes on a whole new level of meaning and purpose and value, and it's a game changer.
Mm. I'm right there with you on that. Thank you.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that there were a whole series of miracles. I'm curious to hear what some of those are.
Well, even at a practical level, the times when we've been, we've had something that where we must put it in place, and I just haven't had the resources to put it in place, but it's been a necessary thing to do. And then, sure enough, we'll get a letter from the IRS saying you overpaid your taxes. Here's a check, and we look at the check, and it's like $3 more or less than what the totality of what we needed. Those sorts of things. We've had multitudes of those happen over the decades, particularly in the area of resources. And I don't really regard it as being as banal as just like money, because I learned very early on that you can't really separate the financial resources as the fuel of the organization from the vision itself. I mean, it doesn't matter how gorgeous the Ferrari is. If there's no gas in the tank, it's going nowhere. And so, for me, the need for us to have resources becomes, at a practical level and a functional level, the fuel that allows us to be able to move forward with momentum. So we've just had lots and lots of situations like that where things have come up where there's just been a very practical need, and it's been provided effortlessly with apparently no effort or undertaking of our own.
Yeah, and it's such a clear message when it's within a couple dollars of what exactly the amount you needed. I love telling this story, which I'll just share very briefly. I probably shared it before here on the show. Um, my friend Angelo, he's an entrepreneur and he's faith based and everything. He was at a diner with his family, and he got the nudge from above to give everything in his wallet, which was $109 as a tip to the waitress. And she started crying once he said, "How does a $109 tip sound to you?" And she showed the text message exchange from earlier that morning with her mom, who said, "I need $109. I can't afford the medicine this month. And the daughter said, I can't afford it either. I can't pay my own bills. I'm sorry. And here shows up this guy randomly with $109 as a tip.
I love it. That's fantastic. I love it.
So cool. So let's go back to this idea of like I'm going to get found out. That's the classic message or tape that's running in the head of a person suffering from imposter syndrome. Right? I'm going to get found out as a fraud. Tell me about your experience of imposter syndrome, your understanding of it, and how you not just conquered it, but danced with it and transformed it.
As a kid, it was just very real for me that there was this way that I should be doing something and I'm not. And if I were to be found out, I would get into trouble. I mean, I sort of won the parents' lottery in respect. My parents were beautiful, and so if that had been something that I was doing that I shouldn't have been doing, it wouldn't have even been getting into trouble. That's not even who they were. But for me, it occurred as being that was very, very real, and that continued right through, even from the point of view of when I returned to music studies, and then decided that I was going to teach. It's like, who are you to teach? You're not an advanced musician. You don't really have theoretical knowledge by any standard, effective standard of measure. You barely can read. You've only learned the ability that this program has enabled. You have no qualifications or credentials in a world where it's regarded as being an essential criteria for you to be a professional educator, for you to be formally qualified, have a degree in performance or pedagogy or whatever the case may be. I didn't have any of those things. And so there was that aspect of it where it's like, who am I to, step into this field? But at the same point in time, I had a whole lot of real world evidence from the point of view of I was good at what I had learned to do and I could play well. And many of those people over my lifetime that were formally trained, were formally educated, had gone right through the graded system of learning. Most of the Commonwealth countries have a far more structured system of learning than, say, in the United States. So whether it's Trinity College or, in Australia, it's the AMEB, the Australian Music Examination Board, where each year you go through your grade examinations, etc. I hadn't done any of that, but I was around people who had gone through that and they didn't play as well as I played. And when I looked at the results that my students were getting after 10 lessons, and I looked at the results that their students were getting after 12 months, it's like, well, there's a certain real world evidence that I'm getting from doing this. And what happened for me was transitional, and it was evolutionary, not so much revolutionary, from the point of view of this just became very clear to me, based on the evidence of what I was seeing and experiencing, that this is really what the world needs. That, as wonderful as it is, and I've got such great respect for the musicians like your daughter that have gone through the rigor of what it takes to elevate to the level of adult concert level performance. That's an Olympic effort that's needed. It's a vocational effort that's needed to be able to do that. But, it's really not what the vast majority of people want. And I think that there's a huge consequence in having populations of people, all human beings without exception, all human beings, no exceptions. Everybody is profoundly musical. Yet we live in this culture where we're under the illusion that some people are musical and other people are not. That is not true. That is an illusion. And that largely that illusion has been proliferated by music educators who come from that belief that some people are musical and some people aren't. And when for many people, they don't quite reach the standards that they're being asked, in order to be able to elevate to adult concert level performance, they're left with the feeling that there's something missing from them. They don't have the commitment or the discipline, and most commonly, they don't have the musical talent. And for me, it's like, no, we've got to understand that all human beings are profoundly musical. We're so musical, we're utterly oblivious to it. Like, if you and I were walking down the street together, we're completely engrossed in conversation. What we're oblivious to when we're in conversation is left, right, left, right. Our walking's just perfect. We're having a conversation. We're not even thinking about it. Just like right now, I'm having this conversation, but right underneath it, left, right, left, right. That's incredibly complex musical self-expression where we've now got polyrhythms functioning just in this incredible marriage between this beautiful, smooth rhythmicality of our feet and the incredible complexity of speech. Even the person who says, might be fine for everybody else, but I haven't got a musical bone in my body. And I say to that person, look, I hear what you're saying, but I need you to hear what you're saying. You just said, have a listen to it. Listen to the rhythm of what you just said. You said, I haven't got a musical bone in my body. I haven't got a musical bone in my body. I haven't got a musical bone in my body. We can't even utter a single sentence without demonstrating an incredible mastery over extraordinarily complex musical concepts. It's really remarkable how human beings are. It's nighttime, we're getting ready for bed, we pick up a toothbrush. You know, we're at a concert and we applaud. We're not thinking anything of it. We are demonstrating this incredible musicality all day, every day, this musical species. And yet what happens what is it that after 300 years of formal music education, we don't even have a fraction of a percentage of the population that can play? And at some point in time, we've got to look and say, is the methodology delivering on its fundamental charter? And I believe the fundamental charter of music education is to equip the entire population with the ability to be musically self-expressed. And after 300 years, it's about time that we say, hey, have we got it right for the vast majority? And I feel that that's what happened with Simply Music, that this method was so. What's extraordinary about Simply Music is how ordinary it is. When you look at really what it is, the brain by design, at a neurological level, the brain by design is a pattern-seeking device. So if you can actually show something to somebody in a way that's homogenous to the way that the brain wants to assimilate information, it translates very naturally and easily. So if we take this natural musicianship that's in our speaking, in our hands, and in our feet, and in our bodies, and if we provide them a know-how that's done in a way that's aligned to the neurological structure of the brain, it produces immediate musicianship on the instrument. And so we had this real world experience. So it wasn't something that my imposter syndrome didn't get transformed by me or me working on. It got transformed by the real world evidence that I was getting back from what it was that students were achieving, and in turn, what teachers were saying, and then what their students were saying. So I got graced with it by instead of trying to figure it out psychologically and by processing, it's almost as if the evidence was like rain. I just needed to stand out in the rain until I got saturated, which I did.
Yeah.
Another long answer.
No, but it's perfect because it really takes this listener or viewer through the journey of how to transform something that is a belief. It's not even a true belief. It's a disempowering belief of who am I to do this thing or to teach this thing or to show off in a public environment, this particular ability or gift or whatever, to who am I not to? Who am I not to share this with the world? Because the overwhelming evidence is to the contrary of my initial belief that I'm a fraud and that I'm not good enough. It's actually completely contrary to that. So, what about the I guess it's synesthesia, but you correct me if I'm wrong on that. Is like, what's the experience of this for somebody who doesn't have that ability that you
Yeah, totally get it. That's a great question. So the first thing is people have just, often say to me, "Well, you're a synesthete," but I'm not. And how it is. It's not as magical and as mystical and beautiful and wonderful as that fusion of senses that synesthesia is. This is far more rudimentary than that. And typically, if someone is a synesthesia, I mean, I'm not sure who's listening to this, but sensory pathways, as when we're very young, tend typically sort of fuse together, and it's as we get older that we start to get this separation of the sensory pathways. For some people, what happens is certain sensory pathways don't separate. So they might remember names, or anytime they hear a name, they see a color. Or for some people, they do math equations, and the math equation they have particular smells. So it's the sensory pathway of smell that's fused with the analytic aspect of math or whatever the case may be. This isn't anything like that. This is far more simple. And as I said before, what's extraordinary about it is how ordinary it is. So this is more like if we were to go out to the sky at nighttime in a dark night and you just look up and see a plethora of stars. But if someone said, hey, look, if you connect this star and this star and this star, it creates a that particular shape. Oh gosh, I can't remember. A constellation. So all we're really doing is distinguishing a shape out of the dots. Well, similarly, in any country in the world where, say, music is taught, piano is taught, the predominant approach is a reading-based approach. Let's learn how to read music, and your ability to do that will dictate your ability to play. So everything is, as a result of that, when you're now having to convert the language of pitch, the language of rhythm, the language of expression and dynamics and form, it's reading music shouldn't be called reading music because there can be up to 7 languages occurring at any time on the page, 7 different languages with 7 different symbolic representations. Reading music should actually be called multiple simultaneous language translation because that's what's required. But that means that by design, it's a multi-thought process experience, but the brain is a single thought process device. So if you're trying to process multiple thought processes, that's like taking 5 lanes of traffic and trying to get it through one available lane. There's a gridlock and a backlog. And that's why so many people have experienced things with such difficulty. And in that approach that's far more theoretical and technical, it biases the experience to the left hemisphere of the brain. Whereas, as we know, the brain, by a pattern-seeking device, if we get our attention off the page and just look at what's happening in the instrument and look at this note that you're playing and then this note that you're playing and this note and then this note and then this note, and hey, can you see that that's just like 2 mountains? It's just like up to the peak, down to the valley, up to the peak, down to the valley. It's just a shape. Or, if I were to take a phrase like da 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 dum, and I were to unfold that on the instrument, it's going from white note up to black note to white note, back to black note, back to white note, back to black note, back to white note. It's creating this sort of an M shape, for example. And so when you actually look at what's happening on the instrument, it's like a game of connect the dots. If you actually imagine one note connecting to the next, and then join those dots together, it's creating shapes and pictures and images. And it's very easy for the brain to remember and recollect as well as translate into the hands because it's not being backlogged and overwhelmed with data. So it's not dealing with data entry. It's really just drawing on the natural musicality in an environment that's aligned with the brain. So that's why it's not synesthesia. Ordinarily, synesthesia is very specific to that person. Mine is more like those diagrams where you look at it and it's an old woman, and then you look at it and it's a young girl. Nothing's changed in the diagram. There's just been a perspective shift. And so this is, more about that than, that's certainly a significant component of it.
Gotcha. When you're talking about these shapes and turning them into like mountains and different things, I remembered the story of Mozart and how he was able to remember exactly a piece that he heard only one time and transcribe that into the musical notes and everything. And I think he was still a young boy at that point, so that was really quite impressive. It was a very extensive piece of music too. I think it was from Allegri, whatever the musician's or the composer's name out of the Miserere. I think it was what it was. Anyway, so that supposedly was true, and I'm not doubting that, and I'm curious to hear how you've heard this story before. I'm guessing
About Mozart?
Yeah.
I've heard, I think that was pretty much just a standard condition for him, his ability to be able to hear something and just be able to replicate it. That was part of his genius.
Right. And what occurs to me about that is it probably was a similar sort of gift that you have, that you were both born with a similar sort of brain wiring that allowed you to see it all in kind of a picture.
It's a tough one to draw that correlation, even at a personal level. Like any sort of comparison with me and Mozart is like, yeah. Um, I see, elements of it where, where it does make sense. Because look, I have, I've had the privilege of training thousands of music educators, and here's me, a high school dropout, didn't, finish 10th grade. That was it for me. And I'm training people with doctorates in performance and theory, and scores of music directors and people with degrees in performance and pedagogy and theory. And I'm not any of that, but I am what I am, and what I have, I believe, is relevant to the world at large. And when I look at and share these concepts, it's really interesting, particularly in the highly trained and formally educated musicians. They say, you know what, I've sort of always done something like this now and haven't even realized, but now that I see what you're doing, I've often thought of music this way. So it's not even that it's that unique. I think it happens for a lot of us in a lot of ways. Sort of like we learn the alphabet and then we learn to bring the alphabet together and it creates words. But when we're reading, we're not really reading the letters of the word. We see it as a whole, but we're not even reading the individual words. We actually are reading almost the silhouette, the shape of the word itself, and the shape of the phrase that we're reading at any point of time. And this is sort of more like that. So that I think my role isn't so much that I created it. And I get lots of people saying, wow, you're a genius. And it's like, really, I'm not. If I've played a role, this way of looking at music was with me before I was even aware of my own existence. Let's get clear that I'm not the creator of this. This was from a higher source. I just got to be the middle guy. Now, if I played a role, my role is that I've spent tens of thousands of hours codifying it into a system, structured, scaffolded curriculum, creating terms of art, languaging distinctions, creating frameworks. I have a deep interest in the structure of human behavior. That's come into play in the way that we do it. I've got a strong relationship to composition. So the curriculum is built around, a really large collection of my own compositions, all that stuff, which has been wonderful. But I didn't create this, and that this way of looking at music is very natural for everybody. We just have to shine a light on it and allow people to be able to have that switch in perspective that seems to be really natural and organic. And we get to do that with students across all ages, children, teens, adults. 95% of music education, I believe, is between 5 and 12 years of age. But in our world, this method accesses the brain so differently that half of our students are between 35 and 100 years of age, total beginners. And it's really super important because of where we're at now in human history. And that's I think that's perhaps the most important point right now. If I can just say a bit about that.
Yeah, please.
I'm an optimist about the future, like down to the genetics of my DNA. I'm an optimist. But we're on the cusp of such a unique time, and we're only scratching the surface of seeing what we will witness over the coming decade is the arrival of an entirely new level of advanced technologies that I believe will completely redefine life on Earth, and it will redefine what it means to be human. When we really see the impact of artificial intelligence, sophisticated virtual and augmented realities, fully self-guiding transportation, major breakthroughs in lifespan extension, connecting our brains to the cloud, microtechnology, nanorobotics in our bodies. I mean, witnessing the birth of humanity becoming a multi-planetary species. Astounding technology will be everywhere, redefining life on Earth, and it will require us to rethink who and what we are. And as much as there's so much about that that's unpredictable, one thing that we know is that we need to think more creatively than ever before, just as a means of figuring out how we're going to address the complexities of the technological world that we're heading into. And so for us, I believe that humanity needs to become the most creative version of our species ever. And what we're understanding about musicianship, there's an infancy in a new area of understanding about musicianship, learning to play. We're now, that prior notion that we had that the analytical person was a left brain person and the creative was a right brain person, we know now that that's not true. That the creativity has far more to do with how connected both sides of the brain are, and as well as how impacted both the short range and the long range connections are between different areas of the brain. And what we're learning is that, we've got this massive bundle of millions of nerve fibers, the corpus callosum that connects both sides of the brain, as I call the creative control center, millions of nerve fibers. What we're learning about musicianship, learning to play, is that it literally grows the brain. It increases neural connectivity. Brain scans show that people who learn music, that corpus callosum is larger. There's more connectivity. So as much as we love music and all the benefit, the emotional benefits, the social benefits, the physical benefits, the psychological benefits, that beautiful form of self-expression that it is, all of which is wonderful. But what we now have the opportunity to do is to understand more powerfully and with more relevance that musicianship provides the brain with this critical neurological nutrition that grows the brain, increases neural connectivity, helps develop our creative capability, and helps to future prepare us. So from that perspective, I think it's more important than ever before that we start to understand that just like we might eat well, but we know we need to take supplements, we need and have this opportunity now to say, hey, look, musicianship is something that is worthy of a higher priority in our lives because of how it's going to help you deal with the type of thinking that's needed for the future and how it's going to help to future prepare your children. And so for me, where I'm at is I've got to get out from behind the curtain and start speaking more and having the opportunity like this to speak to you and your community about the importance of developing creative capability and the role that musicianship can play. So I've got my first TED Talk coming up a little bit later this year. There's more down the pipeline. I'm right in the midst of talking about a project I can't really go into now, but this will open up an opportunity for us to exponentially transform our outreach and grow the opportunity on a global basis at a whole new level. So
that's exciting.
That's where we're at.
Well, I'm excited for you, and congratulations on what's coming for you. I'm sure it's going to be transformative, and it's going to catapult you to a whole new level. So I know we're out of time, but I'm curious if our listener or viewer, they want to pursue this, do they have to go through one of your 700 educators, or can they do an online course? Are there any what's the next step for somebody who's interested regarding whether they are near an educator or not?
Yeah. Look, there's several ways of learning. And, I believe that the superior way of learning is, live in-person lessons with a trained educator where that person has both the tactile as well as the oral and physical and visible and oral opportunity to get to know your learning idiosyncrasies and can tailor and curate, customize the experience to you in that live environment. I think that's the superior learning environment. However, these days, learning regularly with a teacher but doing it online, that's also very successful. Not as successful, but still wonderful would be a self-study program. And one of the things that's really important to me is making world-class education available at no cost. I have this beautiful self-study program that's completely free. It's not a marketing thing. It's not an upsell. There's no subscription or free trial or put your credit card in. None of that. It's just free, world-class education that would give people an experience of my method. And do you mind if I mention the website?
Yep, of course.
Yeah. Well, people can find out about that at simplymusic.com, or you can get to it via that, or if you want to go directly to the hub where it's housed, if you just go to pianoonline.com. And like I say, it's a free program and it's gorgeous, beautifully filmed and prepared, and audio soundtracks and these additional soundtracks where you can improvise along with and get that experience of playing in the band. And we're not starting with, single note, less interesting songs. You start learning immediately. And so, it's typical for students to be playing a repertoire of some contemporary and some classical and some blues and some ballads and arrangements from their very first lessons.
Oh, amazing. Wow.
You need about 15 minutes a day, most days a week. If you can do 15 minutes a day, 4 days a week, you're not only going to be able to bring musicianship and have that experience it's such a beautiful form of self-expression, but also knowing that you're helping neurologically develop your creative capability and helping to future prepare you. It's a powerful and important thing.
Well, you've inspired me. I always had in the back of my mind, like I really should have pursued piano because I believe I still have a gift for it, but I never pursued it.
It's patient and it'll wait for you.
Yeah. Yeah,
You'll just wait till you're ready.
it's been waiting a long time since high school,
Yeah,
and,
yeah,
yeah, it's time to reawaken that. Yeah, thank you.
yeah, it is. Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, thank you, Stefan. Really, very generous and kind of you to have me on your show, have an opportunity to speak to your community. I think you're awesome.
I think you're awesome too, and you're changing the world. You really are, and wow.
Thank you. Thanks for your patience with my long answers.
No, it's great. It's great. And
And I look forward to seeing you at one of the Genius Network events soon.
yes, absolutely. And listener, I really encourage you and prod you to do something with this. Just go on to the Simply Music website and check out the self study program, the pianoonline.com program, or look at finding a student, finding a teacher in your area. Do something about this. Don't just say, "Wow, that was interesting. That was a great story." Apply it in your life because we live in a world of action and you need to take action too. So we'll catch you on the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.